I think I'm ready. Hi, everybody. Right, I was just sorting out some ambient music. Actually, you guys get some ambient music today, so I hope you're all doing good. I'm just gonna catch up with the chat very quickly. Hi, Angela. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here. Hi, James. Hi, Melanie and Maggie. Thank you for being back. Hey, Elizabeth and Passion. Welcome, Lance. How are you doing? Lance, I'm so happy that I'm helping you reconnect with your ancestors. This honestly means the world to me. So thank you so much for being here. Hi, Jim. Welcome back. Kathleen and Charity. Hi, Melody. Welcome, Juan and Beth. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for being here. Hey, JB. Hi, Noah. Hey, Lorna. Hope you're doing good. Adrian, ¿qué tal estás? Hello, Joe and Anne. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, I'm glad you're intrigued about runes. Everyone tends to be intrigued about runes, so I'm glad that we're having this session. Welcome, Michelle and Debbie. Thank you for being here. I'm okay. Thank you so much for asking. Hi, Mary. Hey, James. Welcome. Yeah, it's been a good. Well, I got really soggy on on a previous tour I was doing earlier at 3 p.m. The sky is literally just open on me. But other than that, I'm good. Welcome, Abe. Hi, Danielle. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, Viking is back. I actually have upgraded the ambience today. I don't know if you guys can hear a little bit of sound, like background noise in the background. Well, that was just to add a little bit into it. I've created a new ambience around the office table, and I have my Viking earrings, my Mjolnir, and I actually braided my hair yesterday, but of course, as soon as I went out today and it rained on me, it's just been an absolute mess, so never mind. I tried. The universe said no. This is it. Welcome, Joy. How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining. I hope if I carve... Oh, I'm Abe. Honestly, I am awful at doing this. I just want other people to know how it's done. Thank you so much for joining, Catherine. Thank you. Oh, well, it's quite low right now, so it's probably not very audible, but it's just hints of it. It's not crucial for the tour. I just thought it may help, particularly help me get in the zone. Hi, Natalie. Welcome, Caroline. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, thank you, Lance. It's very nice of you. I am drinking from my appropriate Iron Age themed mug. The coaster is not Viking, though. I'm sorry, Star Wars. So there we go. They're closely related, I guess. Hi, Anna, Grace, and Marlene. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been really liking this honey and lemon tree. So yeah, the Vikings are still approaching. Hopefully they will not crash the party. Well, excellent. Hi, Graciela. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you're all doing good. Okay, it's time to get started. I think that Star Wars and Vikings is a perfect combo, but, you know, I'm biased. So, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me in this brand new session that we are starting today, purely for the sake of keeping things, thematic in this month of March, which is dedicated to the Vikings. For those of you wondering why I decided to do this, is because March was the exact month in which I got my PhD 2 years ago. So I decided to put it all together for this purpose, and because I had been saying that I was going to be doing this for a long time. So it finally all came together. And today we're doing a session that is a little bit different. We're going to be learning about the runes, but what I wanted to show you was how to make your own Viking rune and talk a bit more about what runes are, the role they have in Viking society, and also demystify a lot of the stuff that I'm sure you guys have read on the internet, because unfortunately it's one of those things about Viking culture that is very misunderstood, and a lot of people exploit it for, potential gain, which is quite nasty. So today is a little bit of fun. If nothing else, you're gonna see me making a mess of just sticks, because I can't keep my pulse steady. And hopefully you will be able to do a much better job than I will ever do. So there we go. Hi, Claudia and Terry. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to quickly catch up with the chat. Oh, I'm so glad everybody else is also happy with Star Wars. Yes, it's Thursday, so it's got to be done. Could you imagine Vikings with lightsabers? Abe, I don't think anyone would stand. it would be literally just chaos. Hi, Natasha. I've just seen you in the chat. Hope you're doing good. Welcome, Ken and Jane. We're literally just joining. Let me just grab a little bit more of my drink and let's get started. Well, first things first, let me show you the materials that we have here today because, like I said, I've changed things ever so slightly for the purpose of this session since it's a bit more creative. So here we go. So here we have a lot of treasures. Here is my Viking shield, of course. My Viking box that contains a lot of goodies that I'll show you in just a moment. A very important book, which is the Elder Edda, and I'll explain in a moment just why. This cheat sheet, which is actually a postcard that I bought in Denmark many years ago, which actually explains everything that we need to know about runes. A little bit of paper just so we can mess about with it. And lovely painting that someone bought me from an antiquarian in York from one of the bits of Ragnar's saga. And of course the dragon, because the dragon just looks cool. So first thing I'm gonna do is actually open up my Viking box, which by the way, here it says min dir, which literally means my precious, very Gollum-like, and show you what runes I actually have in here, because I have a few bits. So starting with this is my personal Viking rune, which I actually did in Birka, which is a very important archaeological site in Sweden, just off the coast of Stockholm, where we actually have one of the best preserved evidences of a market settlement in Scandinavia. We have lots of burial grounds in there that have given us a lot of information about the Vikings, and I had to go there specifically because there is a very important burial of a Viking woman that was part of my thesis. Well, over there they have all sorts of reenactors, PhD experts, etc., teaching you how to do different things. And this is my personal rune, which a runologist from the University of Uppsala actually taught me how to do. So that's more or less what I hope to recreate with you guys. Welcome, Sarah and Elise. Thank you so much for joining us here. I'll explain you exactly how I got this with my name, so you can see, one example in the flesh, and then we will try maybe some of your names. Probably not everybody's. I don't think I'll have time for everybody's, but we'll try some other names. Hi, Riley, Ginny, and Sheila. Hope you're doing good. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, the runes nearby Tabby are absolutely amazing. I actually went on a whole tour for them. So there we go. And yes, well, the point is trying to, experiment with different sounds. So here we go. Now here I also have two sets of runes, which I'm gonna show you just now, and actually a bunch of other Viking goodies which are hidden here. Let me see what the cat brought. Oh yes, this is very, very special, and I probably should not really take it out of there because it's sharp. I have some proper wooden spoons carved the way that it would have been in the Viking Age. As you see, they have some runes. This rune we're gonna find out in a moment is the rune Fe or Fehu, which is actually supposedly tied in with Odin and with the idea of wealth and prosperity. And for those of you who may be familiar with the world of Tolkien, it's the exact same rune that Tolkien actually used to base it on Gandalf's rune. So when you're reading The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, and you see Gandalf doing something with his staff, like for example on Bilbo's door when he's trying to recruit him to go fetch Smaug and the treasure of Erebor, this is the same rune. It's just obviously Tolkien, makes it fantasize for the purpose of literature. I have a bunch of other stuff in here. Hello, everybody that just joined. Welcome, Melchizedek. Hi, Carly. Thank you so much for being here. Charlotte, RP, and Becky. Thank you. I have, I actually need both hands for this because otherwise, oh no, I got it. This is an actual original replica of a Viking Age knife, which is actually sharp. So I keep it in the box, well kept. And the reason for that is because this type of knife is the sort of thing you would use on a day-to-day basis to carve, to cook, to do anything that you needed. So people who would be doing these runes as messages would be using something like this. So there we go. Right, I'm going to put you back on the table so I can put all of these things back in there. And so we can talk runes. Right, okay, and hello everybody that just joined. Welcome Jean, Camila, David, and Terry. We're literally just getting started, Wendy, so thank you so much for joining. I made my own runes in the 90s. Oh, nice. Oh, that's a shame that you've lost them, but I'm sure you can do them again. It's actually quite simple. Once you know how to do them. So let me just make some space here again for the gimbal so I can show you the ones that I've got made for me. So I haven't made these ones myself. These are ones that I bought. So this is an old set, which isn't very good. And here I have this lovely leather wallet that actually comes with a set of runes. So these are all cut from a local wood source, and then they are carved into it. Well, these ones are actually pyrographed into them. This is not a proper carving. I'll show you the ones that are carved. And you know those pyrograph pens that you can just carve into them? Well, literally, all it takes is a thin branch of wood, and once you know what you're doing, it's actually pretty straightforward in case of making them. As you can see, they are not terribly complicated forms, runes, because at the end of the day, these were being carved in pretty sturdy materials like wood or stone, quite often even metal. We have a lot of evidence of Viking runes actually being carved into bractae. Bractae is essentially kind of like I guess like an old school version of a bracelet, kind of like halfway through between a bracelet and a torque. So this is how you do them with a pyrograph. And then I have here some others which are on a different set of wood. And as you can see, these ones are actually properly carved into them. So this is just done with a knife. They don't have to be perfect. As you can see, some went a bit wrong. But I think this is a bit more honest, because at the end of the day, when people did these things, they did them in a rush. They didn't necessarily have a lot of time to put out if that, M-like shape was going to come out perfect or not. So, and exactly, imperfection adds character. So as long as they are recognizable, and because they are mostly, like I said, sticks, they are recognizable, then, well, it's relatively easy to do that. Well, excellent. Now that you've seen what runes are like and what, we have to say about them, I am gonna turn the gimbal again and I'm gonna put you facing down to the runes, but actually, looking at them properly so you can start learning which ones are the ones for your name or for something that you may want to inscribe, and then I'll tell you a bit more about what their actual use is. So let me turn the camera around and let's get the gimbal ready. Excellent. So here you have all of the different rune alphabets that we have recorded from history. I'll explain a bit more about each of them in just a moment, but I'm just going to take a second to catch up with the chat and welcome everybody that has just joined us. Hi, how are you doing, David from the artist community of New Mexico? Oh my goodness. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Flynn Susan. Hey, Lord David. Thank you so much for joining us. And hi, Bahanur. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Are runes written with certain strokes? Well, I'm glad that you asked, Lance, because yes, you kind of have to start in a very specific place. And otherwise, you can still make the rune, but you're kind of making your life 3 times harder. Now, I'm also going to show in the chat, I'm sending you guys a little bit of a summary for the Elder Futhark, which Adrian was already on it. This is a bit of a complicated thing. So Elder Futhark, which is the oldest rune alphabet that we have in relation to Scandinavia. Here we have the Younger Futhark, which is like an abridged version that gets used really mostly during the Viking Age. And then here are just some additions that happen, as you can see, in the 10th century already at the end of the Viking Age. So what is all this? What does it mean? Where does it come from? That type of stuff. Here I go. Let me just take a sip of my tea. Excellent. Welcome, Claire. Thank you so much for joining us. So the Elder Futhark is essentially the letters that not just the Vikings, but the vast majority of Germanic societies used in what we call the late antiquity and period of migration, which is, in essence, rather vague historical blabber to say at some point between the year 180 to at some point in the 7th century. Although the truth be told, the Elder Futhark has actually been in use in different parts of the world for all the way up to more or less the millennium, the year 1000. So terminology and dating in here is quite vague, as often is the case with many things Vikings. Well, from the Elder Futhark, we actually have 267 inscriptions from all of Scandinavia, meaning these are archaeological evidence that we have found throughout, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark using this alphabet and telling us different things. Normally, these inscriptions are in relation to either this bractae that I was telling you about, these sort of like bracelet, torque-like things, which describe either ownership or a general wish or message for that person. But more often, where we find these runes are actually in burials or in commemorative stones called rune stones. Hi, Leslie. Hi, Marianne. Thank you so much for joining us. So, actually, we had a huge discovery this year, which is the most recent discovery in rune history. It happened in January 2023, and it is on an area not far away from Oslo, which actually shows a relatively small carving on a slab of stone, which is about 2,000 years old. This is now called the Svingerud stone, and we consider it to be actually the oldest rune carving that we have in the whole world, in terms of, the Germanic traditions. So as you can see, this world is still changing. We're still learning a lot of new things. And that's the reason why sometimes our ideas about runes keep on being challenged. Well, from the younger Futhark, so from this second version, which as you can see is a lot shorter, we actually have a lot more of these carvings. We have about 3,000, which tells us something very important about language. It probably tells us that the language, the original language, Elder Futhark, may have been either too hard for people to learn, or not many people were in the know to leave those inscriptions. And then as we get into the Viking Age, maybe either the simplification or advances in culture make this carving and this writing of the runes more prominent. Yes, Charlotte, I'll spell that for you. If I get it right, hang on, is Svingerud. It literally happened two months ago. So yes, it's been super important. And yes, Icelandic is slightly different from Old Norse, but this is also one of the reasons why we've been able to preserve a lot of this knowledge. Now, even after the moment when in the Viking Age we see the simplification from Elder Futhark to Younger Futhark, we see sometimes certain letters from the more complete alphabet being used into the more shorter one. And this is because we have this misunderstanding or this misconception, even in our own language. I don't know, some of you may use a different alphabet than the Latin alphabet, like potentially Cyrillic or, Greek or something else, maybe even some kind of Asian script. But alphabets are not linear. There is not really a clear cut as to where we started, talking in this specific way and recording letters in that way. So our own alphabet is quite hazy. This one is hazy as well. Where was it found? It's literally just outside of Oslo in what we've called the Svingerud site. So that's the name of it. It's literally, I think it's like 20 miles or something like that west, but I could be getting my geography wrong, so don't quote me on that one. Thank you so much, Natasha. You're very kind. And hello, Thelma. Thank you so much for joining us. So, like I said, this is how it goes. Now, overall, these are the letters, or rather the symbols, because they are not necessarily letters, perhaps in the same way a lot of people would think about them, that the Norse and Germanic peoples throughout time have used to represent sounds. So it's kind of a phonetic alphabet, similar to ours. And the reason why we call it the Futhark is because, I'm just going to put my finger through, as you can see, the first letters of the alphabet are F, U, Th, A, R, K. If you pronounce it all in one go, it's Futhark. And some of the inscriptions, some of the runes that we see recorded all across Scandinavia, often are just spellings of the alphabet. So we don't know if that was perhaps someone who was learning or someone who was trying to pass that knowledge on. In any case, that's the reason why we call it Futhark. And, in the same way we call the alphabet, because alpha, beta, well, instead of starting with the letter A, they started with the letter F. And that's kind of how it goes. Well, just so you can understand a bit more of the transition from the language, how we get from here, the parent language that gets us to the Nordic dialects of Futhark is Proto-Indo-European. From Proto-Indo-European, we descend to Proto-Germanic, And then one of the branches of Proto-Germanic, which in some cases is called North Germanic, is what becomes Proto-Norse and gives us these letters. Then from Proto-Norse, we end up developing different variants. So some of the runes that we see being used in Sweden and in Denmark aren't always the same, likely the same with Norway. And eventually it all changes once we have Icelandic. Icelandic or Old Icelandic is a variation of Old Norse, and this will kind of replace the rest of the languages. Now, there are names for every single rune. I will tell you the names for every single rune as I attempt to recreate them for you guys, just so you can see how you actually have to do it, what kind of strokes you need to make them. But on top of that, in recent years, and I'll actually change the camera to face me so I can tell you this a bit more personally. In recent years, we've seen the development of a lot of sort of guru-like ideas, magical ideas about runes. This is already a phenomenon that starts happening in the Middle Ages at around the year 1200, give or take. And you're probably wondering why. Hi, Aisling and Hania, thank you so much for joining us. And yes, we have several relationships to gods in there. But the reason why we start seeing an association of runes with magic is because of a change in culture. So up until, and as far as we're concerned, throughout the Viking Age, these were just things that they used for the purpose of messages, actually alphabet. But it is true that in Old Norse myths, we actually have reference to the runes being something magical that the god Odin learns, and this allows him to cast spells. Now, there is only actually one reference to this, and I will show you right now. In fact, I'll read it for you since I have it here. The only actual reference that we have of the runes, properly speaking, is in the Elder Edda or in the Poetic Edda, depending on how the translator has called it. Hi, Evie, thank you so much for joining us. And it is actually here, is the stanza 138 of the Havamal, which is a specific poem. So I'll read to you what it says. And here I go. I know that I hung on the windy tree, spear wounded, knife full nights, given to Odin, myself to myself, on that tree that rose from roots that no man ever knows. They gave me neither bread nor drink nor horn. I peered down below. I clutched the runes, screaming I grabbed them, and then sank them back. That is literally, because if I turn the page and I go to the next, all it says is, I had 9 mighty songs that famed, son of both Thorvesla's father. So as you can see, we've changed. We've changed now. We start talking later on about what runes may be able to do for us in terms of spells, but we never really understand what is the proper context. And these words in Havamal are supposed to have been recited by Odin himself. So supposedly, this account is Odin telling you guys that he did this and he found the runes this way, and now he uses them for magic as a god under specific circumstances. Now, that doesn't mean that he's encouraging people to use magic or runes for magical purposes. It doesn't necessarily mean that the runes were supposed to be used by humans this way. We don't know. We don't know if this is something mystical, just for the gods, just for Odin, or something that everyone else should have used. So, in the face of uncertainty, we stick to the truths and the realities that we have, which is the fact that the runes were a language, and maybe because of the sounds and the ideas that they are supposed to represent, in some circumstances, they may have had a magical interpretation. May. Now, there are some figures in the sagas and in the Poetic Edda and the Elder Edda that are supposed to be witch-like people, not only female, but male as well. And maybe in these practices, magic was used. But how does that magic happen, etc., we're still a little bit hazy about. So we have no confirmation about this. However, since the transition of Icelandic society into Christianity, which happens right in the year 1200, that's officially when Iceland becomes a Christian bishopric, the translations of old Norse ideas are starting to be written from a Christian perspective. So this language, everything that you see here starts being seen as something mystical, pagan, and unknown. And as a result, more talk of these runes and magic starts appearing in literature. But this literature is already after the Viking Age. So we need to take it with a pinch of salt, if you see what I mean. We can't just accept everything they say is true, and we cannot completely deny that there is a degree of, political propaganda. Now, towards the 17th and 18th century, changes in society, particularly in Icelandic society, start creating treatises of rune magic because of superstition. There were very uncertain times, particularly in Iceland, under the reign of Denmark for quite some time. So the creation of these runes become part of folklore, folk tales, etc., etc. So it's a little bit Viking, a little bit make believe of the later Middle Ages, a little bit interesting, weird folk tales of the late modern period, and a little bit of modern days people being much more, I guess, aware or accepting of things like Wicca and white magic and things like that, and wanting to use old traditions to put that forward. So, it's not an exact science in any way, shape, or form. So what I'm going to teach you today is the shape of the runes as a language, and how we would have made our own rune if we wanted to maybe preserve or mark something as ours, following the writing style of the Viking Age. Sometimes runes are undecipherable. We think it may be because they are these personal runes. So I'll explain how we do that. And I'll tell you also, for those of you who may be interested, what those runes represent from a supernatural or magical perspective. But we are not summoning anything in here. By the way, we're not doing any of that. So that's entirely, at your leisure. Right, let me just catch up with the chat very quickly. Hey, Evie and Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Kathleen, for the tip. Yes, that's exactly the bit. Adrian, I know you got this. Is it possible that those practicing Christianity try to discourage? 100%, Wendy, 100%. Because if you were saying, hey, if you're writing this instead of Old Icelandic and starting to be Christianized and Latinized, because by then they were already using the Latin alphabet, then yes, you're essentially telling people that if you're doing something that is perceived to be wrong, because magic was actually outlawed under Christian law in Iceland and in the rest of Scandinavia, then obviously they were going to get into trouble. So there we go. Yes, we're going to go. We haven't talked about the runes themselves just yet, Hania. So we're literally getting there. I think the writing of a sort is magic itself. Well, Claudia, we also think that there may be something that has to do with that because of the type of places where we found those inscriptions. In what we call Iron Age societies or even Bronze Age societies, which is our vague generic term to say anyone who wasn't Roman or Greek and was living in the world at the same time, we notice that when these societies don't have a proper alphabet, the recording of these letters happens for very good specific reasons. It has to be, something special. That's why they are often involved with burials. Now, afterlife, death, etc., have very deep connotations in the mind, even in Christian, communities. So we think that maybe the effort and the way of carving them may have had that kind of ritual approach, but not necessarily, if you see what I mean. On top of that, we know that a lot of Celtic societies and the Vikings included to some extent actually believe that certain material elements, particularly stone, were, if not necessarily sacred, mystical or spiritual to some extent. So by carving into them, they were kind of like unleashing that energy or that spirit. And that is, part of the mysticism, I also think, that goes along with it. So there we go. Now, I am gonna grab some paper and I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna still keep this inside so you can see how a professional does it, but I'm gonna show you how the strokes are done with each of the runes. So we'll start with we will do the elder Futhark. The younger Futhark is really just there in case you're interested, and then I'll show you how you make your own individual rune. Now, for the sake of making things easy, because otherwise things kind of get a bit squiggly, I'm using some lined paper. This is literally like an old sort of like diary that I just had there. So I'm just going to use the lines so I can sort of make them more or less straight. And then I'll make a proper one in, paper, making my attempt of trying to make them look pretty. So let's get this sorted. So we have the alphabet there, my paper here. Everything is more or less in sight. Excellent. I'm just gonna cover the lower part of the thing so we don't get distracted. So we know that we are literally here with the main runes. Right, I'm gonna start with a pencil. I use one of these just because it's a bit easier for me to do it, and then we'll go from there. Let me just quickly catch up with the chat before I get started. Hey Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. And yes, Hania, actually a lot of people do teach runes, and I will give you some pointers for anyone who may want to learn a bit more about this when we finish the session. Thank you so much, Lance, it's very kind of you. I think also, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Wendy. It's another way of, empowering people. Right. Well, actually, I'm going to have to twist this ever so slightly because my handwriting is atrocious. Right. So we're starting with F, which is fe or fehu. So normally when you're writing these letters, and you need to think as well of the surface and the way they would be carving this, you start with the strongest part of the structure, which is normally the vertical line. So if I do an F here in Viking, rune would be like this. So as you see, I start with the little letter and then I make it bigger. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna make this bigger so you guys can see it better on the camera. So we always start with the central line and then we do the parallel strokes. So this is fehu. Then we go on to u or ur or uruth, depending on how you're doing it. Now this one can have different shapes. It can be literally just a stick and kind of like a triangle. This depends often on how, skillful the person carving the rune is, because getting straight lines on metal or stone is not particularly easy. Sometimes we see it like this, kind of like an N. And I'll do it big for you guys. So literally all you need to do to get this right is do kind of like an isosceles triangle. There you go. That's lovely. Oh, thank you, Marlene. Right, now we have the, thurs, turisas. This is the rune of Thor. And this is literally just another stick. And here at about in the middle, we make a little triangle. Like that. Then we have A, Alkir. And for those of you, if you're just about catching the back end of my music, which I've purely put for ambience, what is sounding in the background is Wardruna, which is a Viking recreation musical project by Einar Selvik from Norway. So if you're interested to find out what these words would have translated like in the Middle Ages, they're a good one to go to. Right, now we go with right, which is R. And as you can see, this is pretty similar to how we use it in our modern day alphabet. The only thing is that supposedly it's not supposed to touch the main stick. But I've seen runes on actual stone and whatever where it was not neater like that. So never mind. Then we have Gaun, which is literally the K sound, and it's just like a little triangle like that. This is for both K or C when the C is K. So, excellent. And now we have the X, which is literally like a modern day X, except it's not. This is the sound for K or G. So far, so good. Thor looks a little like the Icelandic theta. I am so glad you mentioned that, because that's exactly where we get it from. This, or where we get theta, where we get thorn, and where we get the TH in general in English. Because what I haven't told you yet is that it's not just the Norse or Germanic societies in Central Europe that use this. In England, specifically speaking, and actually later on throughout the rest of the British Isles, we end up using a very similar version of Futhark. It gets reinforced once actually the Vikings arrive into the British Isles and start raiding and conquering, but even the Anglo-Saxons were using something like this. So there we go. Thank you so much for joining us, Bethany, and thank you so much for the follow. Right, where were we? Let me get back to this, because honestly, I swear, if I lose the groove, I can get back into it, and it's really embarrassing. Right, so here we have the W sound, which, as you can see, is very easy. If you put, sometimes if you just put, it's the same shapes, but if you just put that little triangle somewhere all together on the same stick, you've completely messed up the groove. So you could be sending the wrong message. And that's the reason why precision here matters a lot, which is something that I lack. So for those of you trying this at home, I really hope that, that you do this better than me. Well, now you will see what happens when we have more than just a single sticks. Instead of doing one stick and then the stick in the middle and the other one, always start with your vertical lines first, because you're more likely to get things straight and you can gauge the dimensions better. So this is our H sound, which, as you can see, is quite similar to our modern day H. Our N sound. Well, that was a bit of a botch, never mind. Thankfully, pencil will will go through that. My favorite letter in the whole Futhark is I, because there you go, it's just one stick. And then we have the sound J. Now, this one is one that obviously was quite difficult to carve. And as you see in the later versions, it disappears. The sound J is completely gone. But anyway, because to do this, you kind of need to do like a little tick and a reverse tick, but they need to be roughly symmetrical, which this is not. So, do not follow me, follow the main thing, but you always start with the, with the top and then down. Right, I'm gonna go down another line so we can carry on with this. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, then we have this one. Again, always start with the main vertical thing. And for the sake of making things even, do both ends together. So as you've seen, I've gone, you need to try and do it symmetrical, going this way as well. Try, whether it succeeds or not, there you go. This one is a sound that we don't use very often, and I suspect you guys will not need it. The E with the I with the umlaut is quite a weird sound that is still puzzling a lot of linguists in the Viking Age, but it's quite easy because it's literally just a stick like that. Then we have the Z sound, which doesn't happen all that often in Germanic languages of this time period, at least not in Norse, but we see it every so often. Again, you start with the stick and then you add the other sticks, trying to make them as symmetrical as possible. And then we have S, which is my personal nightmare, because as you can see, it's squiggly bits. So we start from the top. It's kind of like a squared S in our modern alphabet, if you see what I mean. Then we have T, which is Tiwath. This is the rune for Tyr, and we've seen this rune actually carved in different weapons, because Tyr, being a god of war and being the god of war from a sensible perspective, was supposed to be someone that you could invoke in battle. So it makes sense, not necessarily from a magical perspective, but from a ritual perspective, to carve the rune of Tyr in your sword, in your axe, etc., etc. So that's one that we know quite easily. B, which, as you can see, is very similar to our modern day B, just triangular instead of round. Again, think that all of these, like Adrian mentioned, it would have been difficult to do curves as you're going around. So there we go. We have a couple of vowels. So this is A, and then we have E, and then we have the other letters at the end. And actually, this is U or sometimes V, depending on the thing. But if you notice, and even though all of these are proper letters, vowels and consonants, once we go into the younger Futhark, a lot of the things that we're missing, they are the vowels. And that's the reason why vowels are a bit tricky in Norse scriptures. A lot of the time when you put one vowel in the middle of two consonants, the noise was already there. So they kind of seem to think that as long as you know your consonants, then everything else is fine. Right, now we're going with the difficult ones. Okay, bear with me because I hate these ones. So here we have Einwath, which is kind of like an M, but it doesn't have the sound M. And that was not symmetrical at all, but there we go. And now we have the letter M, Manas. And again, we're gonna do this and this. So as you can see, we crisscross. Instead of trying to do the two little triangles, we just crisscross, and there we go. Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for joining us. And then we have the L, which is, again, very similar to the letter L in our alphabet. It's one stick and a little thingy down there. And now the proper hardcore ones that I never get right. So now we have this sound, NG, which is the sound that you find not just necessarily as an ng, but the I is often supposed to be implied in that sound. So let's see if I can do this. As you can see, it's much smaller in terms of size than the rest. Oh my God, there we go. It's kind of like like a diamond shape, which if I had any idea of symmetry, this would be much better. Hi, Janitska, thank you so much for joining us. And then D, which is my personal nightmare because I never get it right. This is supposed to be more of a square than a rectangle, but again, do as I say, not as I do, because I can't. And again, we just do the crisscross as symmetrical as possible. And then finally the O. Now, in order to do the O, I never start at the top because it's difficult to get your symmetry right. So I'm gonna do O here instead. So we start with the cross. You start with the cross, you create your base, and then you just add a little triangle on top. It's a lot easier, and that is most likely how they did it, because the larger strokes are easier to put together, and then all you need to do is just finish it off. Yes, Lance, so here we have the letter C, or what represents the letter C, but purely for the sound K. So if you're thinking of something like cereal, that would be normally represented by the sound S. Right. Now, while you look at this, at the good example and not my bad example, I'm going to explain to you what the names of all of them are and what they symbolize from like mystical perspective. But remember, the mystical bit of things is kind of, a little bit neither here nor there. So let's start with from the beginning, I guess. That would be good. So, like I said, fehu, which is the F, is the letter that is supposed to bring you abundance. If you are wanting to sort of look at this from a mystical, magical perspective, fehu is normally associated with not just wealth, but things like domestic items such as cattle. Think that in the Viking age, having animals in your farm was just as good as having money, because that meant you probably weren't going to die that winter. So that's what that letter sort of represents. Anything that has to do with wealth, but not necessarily, money, just the general idea of wealth itself. That can also translate in other types of possessions, etc., etc. Then we have uruth, which is the little sort of triangle, which is the sound for u. And normally, from the sort of spiritual, mystical point of view, uruth tends to represent a wild ox. And in the sense of the ox, this is not so much for the sake of wealth or whatever. That's more from the idea of, strength. At the end of the day, what's going to be stronger than an ox in your life, from a ordinary person perspective? Nothing. You need an ox to work on the land, preferably, unless you are poor and have to do that all on your own. If you have an ox, your land is going to be better prepared for farming, and you're going to have an easier time because the animal is simply stronger than a man. So that's where that comes from. And then we have turisas. So the th sounds is called turisas. And we see this, like I said, not just in Futhark, but in a few other languages. And this is supposed to be the rune that is associated with Thor. And this is where we get the letter thorn in English, and where we get the sound th as well. So that's where the connection is. Then we have A, which is this one, the sort of F, which is ansooth. And ansooth is it's a strange letter from the point of view of the, I guess, mystical or spiritual. I know I keep on changing my mind as to what to call it, but it's because, frankly, I'm not comfortable with either of those. I've not really made up my mind as to which one I would prefer. But ansooth is normally represented as the letter of the gods, the Esir, and often directly linked to Odin. it is supposed to be a letter that represents communication, messages, something like that. Then we have the R, our actual letter R, which is raido, and that is quite interestingly. And if you think of the sound ra, it's related to chariots or wagons because of the clunk 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 noise that comes from it. You know, if you're going to be moving something, it kind of has that type of sound. And it's usually associated as well with the idea of traveling and being fast. Then we have the little triangle, that is the letter kenas, with a k sound always, not a s. And from the point of view of the mystical, magical things, this is supposed to be the representation of light, but light from the point of view of not necessarily just fire, but enlightenment, knowledge, that type of stuff. A lot of these things, again, because they're sort of semi-mystical, can have varying meanings depending on the context, which makes it all a little bit more confusing, I guess. Now let's go with another false friend, which is the X shape, which is actually the letter gebo or gebo, depending on which variant you're using and which language. And this is the letter for gifts. Any sense of giving on to other, any exchange, that is gebo. Then we have wunjo, which is this little sort of P, not to be confused with that one. And actually, it says here W, but frankly, in Eldred's Futhark, it can be a W or a V. And this happens not just with Norse or even Germanic languages. There are some Baltic languages, like, for example, Lithuanian, where the sound W is still, to date, replaceable by a V. And vice versa. So a lot of Lithuanian people and other people around the Baltic actually call the Vikings Vikings for this same reason, because it descends from a letter that for them was very similar, and it's perceived as a kind of multi-purpose sound for those two letters. The V and W sound have been very ill-defined throughout time, so it's not just an issue of the Vikings at all. Well, then this is Bunjo, and it's kind of supposed to be in joy or pleasure. It's the happy rune. the happy rune. I never thought I would say that live in front of an audience, but here you go, guys. It is the happy rune. When you're having a bad day, just draw the happy rune. It will make you happier, I guess. Well, now we move on to the sort of H letter, which is Hagalath, and this is the letter that represents hail. And not just hail, but the destructive force of nature. So again, hail is obviously, as you can imagine, quite terrible in the northern countries, but anything that could be as destructive is associated with it. Then we have the bad stick that I drew there, which is this is now Thith, and now Thith is the letter that represents a need for something, a requirement, a restriction, something that you must overcome normally. Then we have the one single stroke, which is an I, which is Isa or Is, which those of you, English is your main language, you will immediately identify as incredibly similar to ice. And that's because it comes from the exact same root, and it means the exact same thing, ice. And as you can imagine, well, ice is not necessarily a good thing. Ice is also perceived as a challenge or a frustration from like a mystical point of view. Then we have the weird squiggly thing, J, that is Jera. And Jera here, we can use it both as a J sound, as a J in the English language, or as a Y sound in things like yellow. It's again, it's that sound that happens in so many languages that it's potato, potato. It can be one or the other. That is normally the rune that is associated with good harvest from a mystical perspective. Then we have Awath, which is actually a very, very difficult, not actually, sorry, I've skipped through Pertho. Pertho is, I guess, in many ways, if you look at the shape of it and you look at it upside down, right, from this perspective, you will understand the relationship. This is supposed to be the rune that is related to female, to the womb, and to the things that are hidden or secret. So, from a very, very sort of ideographic perspective, perhaps you can understand the shape and everything. But of course, it is represented this way. So, as a result, it is often a rune that in magic and pseudoscience is applied for anything that is supposed to be, mystical, unknown, and unfeminine. So, ladies, it is your rune, I guess. But, your interpretation, not mine. And within that interpretation of the feminine, there is 1 trillion different takes that we can interpret. Then we have a wath, which is this e with the little dot on top of it. Sometimes it is translated as a straight at e kind of sound. It's an ambivalent noise and it causes a lot of problems. And it literally means a horse or two horse. So as you can see, a lot of these things are directly related to, actual life. P, yes, the sound P, anything that starts with a P, it is perso, and it is supposed to be related to female. So there we go. Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for joining us. Then we have algith, which is the sort of broomstick, but upside down. I'm sorry, I keep on giving them funny names just so they are perhaps easier to remember. I found that if I did that when I was trying to remember them, with like mnemotechnic techniques, it stuck a bit better. And that is a rune normally associated with protection. And the animal that protects in Norse culture is normally a deer or an elk. So that's that. And that's probably why, if you think about it, why the symbology is like a long face and 2 horns. So, there is some method to the madness. Some, not, everything. Then we have the squiggly S, which is sobulo, or what later on in Norse itself will be known as sol. And sol is, of course, the sun, light. Funnily enough, the same word for sun exists in Spanish and in Norse. Those of you who know Spanish, you know that the word for sun in Spanish is sol, and we pronounce it in the exact same way. Well, then we have Teiwath, which, like I was telling you earlier, is the rune of Tyr. So again, this is the rune for battle, is the rune to, sort of summon your inner power as a warrior to not die and to be able to overcome your opponent. It's a martial rune in every single way. And then we have the little B, Berkana, which in different versions of the rune alphabet has different names. It can be Berkano, Bjarkan, Bjork, like the name of the singer Bjork. And that is the birth goddess, fertility, that kind of thing. That is what it's supposed to represent. And again, if you think about it from a visual perspective, what does that remind you of? It could be a very literal representation of breasts, in the same way that this was a very, iconographic representation of the womb. The plot thickens. In the Isle of Man, we have stones. Yes, both of them. This is quite common, particularly in the British Isles, a mix of things, but this is quite common. Right, we have now the weird ones. So we have Ewath, which is the M that is not an M. And this is, an interesting rune because it is, technically speaking, once again, an animal. Is supposedly another version of the horse. It's just we can represent it in different ways, with the sort of, long one or the other one. Sometimes it's perceived to be maybe a yew tree. It varies, but it's supposed to be that horse animal thing. Well, the one that looks like a proper MM, so this one, that is Manath, and that is the letter of mankind. So again, if you think about it, Manath, man, men, etc., etc. In most Scandinavian languages, the word for man is like in English, and that is another connection between the two languages and the in the Futhark in here. Then we have the letter L, which is Laguth, and it's, as you can probably imagine, related to another aspect of nature. Laguth is supposed to be water, particularly a flow of water, like a water leak not necessarily still water in a lake, that flow, without necessarily being a river, but something in movement. And then we have the ng sound, which, as you will notice immediately from the actual representation of it, its name is inguth. As you can see, the majority of these letters kind of finish in uth, zeta, or ath, z, something along those lines. We are not entirely sure about inguth. Sometimes it's called ingwath, and we think maybe it represents the earth, but maybe male fertility. It's one of those. Very rare one, unsure from the mystical perspective as to what exactly is supposed to bring to the table. And then we have Dagath, which is this one, which is the letter D, but this is a hard D, so D, not th, because if you do th or anything in between, you're already going towards Thurisas, and that is the letter of Thor. And Dagath is literally day. So again, any of you that speak any Germanic languages and even into English, dag, tag is the same thing. It comes from that very same noise. And of course, day and dawn, which is the break of the day. And finally, we have Othila or Othala, depending on the pronunciation, which is the funny sort of fish-like letter, which is supposed to mean like your ancestors, like heirlooms, things like that. It's one of those strange concepts that kind of flow a bit over it. Well, let me finish my tea, and then we're gonna actually write some runes, some personal runes. Welcome, Bea. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'll start by explaining you my rune. So this is a combination of all of the letters that make my name, and that's what you need to start thinking. So if you write out your name, every single letter is supposed to have a corresponding one, right? I'll show you mine, and then we will see how it happens. So the first thing you need to do is practice each letter independently from your name into the runes. Once you have the letters span out, what you need to look is for the similarities, for the places where each individual rune may have a point of connection with the other. Because what you want to have is one central pillar and then bits that add onto it. Sometimes you don't need to add all of the letters because different components of your letter are already in the ideography of another letter. This will make a lot more sense once I actually spell things out. But you're supposed to end with something like this, kind of like a rune extended preferably downwards. You can extend them towards the right if there is no appropriate place where to do it downwards, but this is the preferred method. And personal runes were supposed to be secret. So even though this is the method we think they may have done it, they may have followed other rules. This is just an interpretation. And you may put this on your door to keep something safe or to identify that this is yours. Like I said, very unsure of it as of yet, but this is what we're rolling with. Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for joining. Right. So let me show you once again on the paper how we do my letter. Well, Charlotte, this is where things get complicated and meta, because the Norse language and Proto-Indo-European didn't really have a ch kind of sound. So in traditional Germanic names, your name would just be written with a k. So if we follow the the tradition itself, but you can try and decide to anglify it. So we are doing this currently, so you could do a combination of k and h together. So there we go. Oh, okay, cool. Right. Well, so I'm gonna write very poorly here. So my name, obviously, first, so you can see how I'm following the method. I must admit, my name is kind of easy, because, well, we will see. And then the runes in Elder Futhark that follow suit. So I need an Laguth, Is, Laguth. You will see here why things are very easy for me. Another Is. And then we have A, which is, well, here is where we have the issue. Now, A in the Elder Futhark is this kind of downwards tendency. I can use that. When I did it originally in Birka, the runologist actually told me that if I use the younger futhark, that would also be valid. So we can kind of play with the rules a little bit. And the reason why she encouraged me to use the younger futhark is because, as you can see, A and N are the same thing, but pointing at a different direction. So they would combine better together. But I can do both. So I'm going to try and do both. So let's do this. And then N, which is the little stick on one side. Like that. Now, if I wanted to do the younger futhark, I would do the same for the A, but go in the opposite way. So let me zoom you in so we can see exactly how the pattern goes here. Now, as you can see, the vast majority of my letters have a very clear one pillar. So that's why we start with this. One strong pillar. And the first letter, there. Now, because in this letter we already have the foundation for this one, I don't need to repeat it. Any letters that are repeated, go. So this one is already incorporated in here, it disappears. This one is the first one, and the first one, it disappears. We've already dealt with this. I literally just need to incorporate 2 more runes. Easy peasy. Well, I'm going to do 2 variations, one with the elder futhark only and with the other 2. So since A already has the top part, I just need to add a little bit here. And that is the A resolved. And now we just need to think about the N. So if I had actually done this symmetrically, which I didn't, and this came a lot farther down, more like this, all I would need to do is give me an extra stick here, and I have the shape of the N, because it's literally just prolonging this little thorn there to the top. And that's it. That would be my personal rune. Now, when we were doing this, I thought that it looked a bit lame. So with the younger futhark, the version goes like this. So I have my main stick, the L, L, Y, L, I, L, blah, blah, blah. And here, instead of doing the downwards, I come down and I put one stick there, and then I cross the other one over there. And to me, that just looked a bit more stylized. And that's how we end with this. So that's the process. Now, that probably looks a bit intimidating. This is a game of, playing several times. So I'm going to try a couple of your names, guys, just so you can see different shapes, because I appreciate some shapes, can be a bit difficult. How would I do Mel? Okay, Mel. So we will start with, let's put this here, and let's use this bit of paper. So I will write out your letters first, and then we will do them separately. And by the way, guys, as much as I'll be loving to do this all night, obviously I'm not going to be able to do everybody's. So here we go. The first rune that we need for Mel's name is M, is Manath, and here we go. So we need that symbol, then we need the E, and here if we go there, we already have an E, and aha, look, the coincidence. This is going to be super easy. And then we have Lauguth. Now, obviously this shape is already incorporated into this, and this shape, if you realize, is already here. Like if I cover this, oops, I've literally just been out of the thing all the time. So let me do that. So we have M, which is this one. This is already within this shape, and then we have Lauguth here. We don't need to deal with this because it's already incorporated in the most difficult letter. And Lauguth is already here too. If I cover this, you see there, it is one stick one way and then the little hook on the other side. So actually, Mel, all you need to do is this. And because it's a personal rune, people don't need to know that this is not just Manath, but that actually all of the elements of your name are included into this. Yes, I will add the rest of them. So I'll follow with Melissa, just because that's an easy one, and we can see how things get a bit more complicated. So we already have this. We need an I, which is just a stick. But as you can see, we're going to have the same problem. So this I is going to disappear quickly. And now we have the serious issue. Now, in Elder Futhark, the S is this squiggly thing of doom. In the younger Futhark, it's a lot easier to do. So we can either do this. Well, that was a poor attempt. Let's do that better, sorry. Symmetry is not my forte. So we can either do that, or we can do this sort of thunder sign. And then for A, we have, like I said, the two other options. So this or this. So departing from the M, I'm actually gonna move here so we can have more space, because obviously I'm too clumsy for this. So we will start with Manath. We don't need the E, we don't need the L, they're already incorporated into here. We don't need the I either because it's one stick, so we have the one stick here. This is bad. Okay, let's try that again. Sorry. There's a difference between, having no symmetry and a difference between just doing it all wrong. So the first 4 letters are all incorporated into Manath. Forget about it. Now we need to make a decision. Are we going to incorporate the very difficult squiggly line or the easier thunder? Personally, considering that if you see the options that we have for the A, we need going A, I think it would be much easier if we use this version of the N and this version of the A. Because then all we need to do, we already have this going downwards here. We could use this line there, but it's not exactly at the right position. So we could do this, there, and then down. You see what I did there? So this is the beginning of the there. Then this is already that line going there, and then down here. And then all you need to do is incorporate the other little stick there. Otherwise, we would have to do this horrible thing, which is a pain I do not wish upon anyone. And trying to incorporate the squiggly line here. So we could use this because it's already squiggly, and then create sort of like a serpent base here. And then the F, which would add more complications because we kind of have one down here, one down there. They're not exactly in the right position, but we could justify it. But I don't know if that looks more elegant than this. Obviously it's your choice. It's one of those things. Right, let me just quickly catch up with the chat briefly. Excellent. How would I do I? Y doesn't really exist exactly in the Futhark. You could try and use the later version, which is this kind of squiggly thing with the dot. But if you need to use a Y sound, it depends whether it's Y like an I, in which case you just use the E, or whether it's Y like a J, in which case you need to use that. And if you need to use that, it's very, very difficult to incorporate it into this. It's normally something that you would add, for example, here on the bottom as its own thing, which kind of breaks the pattern a little bit, but that's the thing. All right, I have time for one more. David, since you put your name there, I'll do that because it also adds some different letters that we haven't done just yet, and I think that would be nice to see. Hi, Raf, thank you so much for joining us. Yes, Lorna, it's because you have the O and the R. Those two are a pain, an absolute pain. So there we go. Let me just grab another page so we can do this. How would a person seeing your condensed rune pronounce it? Well, the point is that if you make your own personal rune, it's supposed to be for you. No one else is supposed to be able to decipher it. Otherwise, you would write it like we've been doing out loud so that everyone would be able to do. So this is like your personal thing. It's supposed to keep something you love safe or keep a hidden message. And obviously, if anyone else wanted to decode it, they would need the key and you would need to tell them. Right. Using the younger one, the N and the H of my name aren't a problem, but how would you incorporate the O? Well, the O, again, is another one of those situations. So, for example, using the case here in Manath, technically speaking, so if I do a brand new Manath, technically speaking, if I cut half there, you already have this sort of little triangle, right? So we can do that, and then all you need to do is extend the sides, but it doesn't look very neat. So another option that you can do with this is actually pull further down. So instead of building on what you have already, build underneath, kind of like that. It looks a bit messier. Unfortunately, if you have an O or an R, things will get messy. But for example, like I said, I'll use David's name just to show you a couple of versions of this. So David will have Dagath, which is this, and we're gonna have it here again, so I'm not gonna bother including it. We need an A, and because I can already see the shape of things, we may try either of them. And then we need a V. Now, like I said, there is no proper V sound in here, so we need to go to the closest thing, which is this, W. So that's gonna be another little thingy, and this one. Since we have the I already incorporated in any of the other letters, we can forget about it. All we need to do is think how to incorporate this into Dagath, which is actually one of the hardest runes to start with and to incorporate later. So let me do this properly. Okay, well, that's pretty symmetrical. I'm pretty impressed. So that would be Dagath. Now we need to decide. It would be pretty easy to already make the A here because we already have one stick there and one going down. So we just need to kind of do this, and we have the A. And then we just need the P. Since this is kind of a different angle than what we need for this, unless you've done it very narrow and very compact, it's not gonna work out. So you have two options. You can either pull here and do a little triangle at the bottom, or you can join the A bottom half there and actually do it a lot sharper and bring it here. The only issue there is that you could potentially be mistaking it with Thurisas, but at the same time, it's your personal rune, so it kind of comes down to what you want. If I had to do this myself, I would do it the following way. There is no P in the younger Futhark, so we cannot really do this from a different perspective. I would do this. I would do a nice strong Dagath. There we go. Okay, let's make that cross a bit neater. This was also, I would say, a lot easier doing it with crayon and paint. The strokes are a lot less fiddly. Then I would do the stroke down for the A here, because this, at least to me, looks like a cleaner shape. And I would go with the little extension here and the tiny triangle there for the P. That's what I would do because I think that looks neater. It could be obviously someone else's interpretation. And that is pretty much all I have time for today, guys. But let me just quickly catch up with the chat. If you have time, oh, Flynn, I can give you a couple of ideas with that one, because you have this here, Futhark, there, and then you have the L that kind of goes down. Everything that you're gonna need is just gonna happen there. The vast majority of the other letters are gonna go because the L is gonna be incorporated there. The Y is gonna be an I, so it goes, and then the N, you're gonna want to go with this, which is already a stick down. So all you need to do is getting that first letter right and then add the L. It's very, very easy. So there we go. I'm very sorry, Teresa, Sharon, and James. We're literally just getting to the end of this. Thank you so much, Melanie, for the tip. And oh, Graziella, I can try. Okay, let's do one last one. We'll do Graziella's name, and I'm gonna do it on proper paper because I'm running out of thingies. So let's see if I can do this. How actually is it possible to read? Well, like I said, Natalie, it all depends on the code. If you're wanting to write proper, then you need to write the runes like we've been writing them on a string. This is just for your personal rune. Right. So we're gonna do Graziella's name, and that will be the last one. And this one is gonna be a difficult one because it has a lot of squiggly lines. So thank you for the challenge. Do you always put the connecting letters to the first line? Yes, as long as you have space. If you run out of space or it starts being busy, you just make the first letter longer and you keep on adding there, or you attach them to the second line if you think it looks neater. Thank you so much, Juan and Beth. It's very lovely of you. And thank you so much, guys. This is very kind. Right, okay. The ultimate challenge. The longest name with all of the different sounds. So we need the X. Okay, I need to start this again. This is bad. This is bad. Okay. X. R, which is going to be R. A, which simply, I can already tell you, we're already going to go with this one because as you can see, it has two roots that are the same than that one. The Z. The Z is the little elk-like sound. Now, interestingly, and this is the other thing that you need to think about, it's not just about how you write your name, it's about how your name sounds phonetically. So people, for example, if you're coming from a Spanish language, to me, I wouldn't write Graciela's name with a Z like a Z. I would write it with a th, with a thurisas, because for me in Spanish, the name would be Graciela. And as such, the phonetics of the language sometimes is more important than the way you spell things out. But anyway, we'll add the proper one just to try and keep things out of there. And then we have Laguz, and then finally again. So as you can see, these ones at the end we're not gonna need. And we are not going to need the I either because we have it incorporated in so many. So now we just need to mix the most difficult letters of the whole alphabet. So we will start with this. And this was probably there, right? Now we're going to try to incorporate the R here, which is relatively easy to some extent because we already have this downward curve and this here. And all we need to do, technically speaking, is create another line that goes there. So as you can see, I am doing the R like this. There, there, and there. Adding an extra line just there to create that R shape. The A, we're literally just going to extend that line up because that is the kind of downwards F. And now we have this. For this, the best thing to do is stick where we are here and make one thorn there and one thorn there. And there you go. So that would be the best attempt, or at least the cleanest attempt, I think, at making such a complicated name such as that. That would be the ultimate goal. Can I go up the way to fit the O onto the L? 100%, Lorna. And actually, as I'm just going to turn the camera now to explain a couple of things. So this is the science behind it. Now, the reality of events is that half of the times when we're actually looking at runes and looking at how people have written them, even when they're not doing personal runes, when they're spelling things out, runes are flipped, the dimensions are changed, runes are combined into another, because at the end of the day, it depends on how crafty you are at making things and how easy it is for you to do it. So if the R fits better in your design the other way around, or the A, do it. There is no exact grammatical sense from that perspective, unlike in modern day languages. So as much as this may look a bit intimidating, hopefully it gives you a better idea of what this could be looked like. Well, thank you so much everybody for joining. I'm very sorry, Lorna and Hasem, you're literally just arriving towards the end of the tour, but I really hope that this has been insightful, if nothing else, for understanding how languages are used and how other people think about it, and maybe to create something personal for your own safekeep that then you can use at a later stage. I'm sure that people that can actually draw, like me, would be able to make this a lot prettier. So it's also a matter of practice. I'm just rubbish at it. But if any of you actually have any artistic skills, I would love to know how it comes together on your end. So there we go. Oh, thank you so much, guys. You're very kind. Thank you so much, Joanna. It's very lovely for you to be so generous. And thank you, guys. How scientists were able to decode runes? Well, Natalie, the vast majority of the knowledge we have of the runes currently is from runes that had been translated into Old Icelandic. So we were just using Icelandic and Old Norse, and then into runes we were walking backwards. Now, here is a recommendation if you guys want to know more about this. Don't go and buy any book that you find on the internet, because what you will find is rubbish. Do yourself a favor and go learn from actually the best person on the internet that will teach you all of this for free, and who is a scholar just like me, that has actually very similar ideas. His name is Professor Jackson Crawford, or Dr. Jackson Crawford. He has an entire channel on YouTube where you get free lessons, videos, tutorials, etc., not just about runes, but about Old Norse. Although he has an entire free course on just Norse and runes, where he goes into a lot of this stuff a lot deeper. And he will explain as well a little bit more of the background from the point of view of magic, and why that is misleading. So it's that one, excellent. Dr. Jackson Crawford, who is absolutely amazing. He also has a very relatable way of explaining things and breaks things down very, very well. So I really, really recommend that you have a look at his work. And if you're interested into getting, for example, a copy of the Edda, I mean, this one is from Penguin, which is literally like $7. Well, it was $7 back in 2010. I suspect not so much, but he has his own translation of it. And that may be also a good one to read, and if you want something more proper. Yes, the cowboy. Exactly, the cowboy, Melissa. He's lovely. So there you go. Those are my recommendations for the day. I hope they are useful. I hope you found this, if nothing else, entertaining. And on that note, I'm going to go get myself some dinner. Thank you so much, Gabriela. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Take care and have a lovely day. And keep on Vikinging on. Bye. See you later.